Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Gustavo Tolosa, the host of today's webinar, and you probably know me from other webinars that I've done with Dr. McDougall and Chef AJ and other doctors. And today I have one of our star guests who everybody loves and adores. And of course, I can say it. I think we have the best psychologists in the world, and I know that Chef AJ agrees with me. So this is Dr. Doug Lisle, co-author of The Pleasure Trap, and also the author, I think, together with Jen Hogg of the website Esteem Dynamics. That later on I want to ask you a little bit about that. And of course, you can book a session with Dr. Lisle himself when you go to his website, esteemdynamics.com. And we're not going to spend any more time on introductions. I will just welcome you, Dr. Lisle. How are you from California?
Good to see you, Gustavo.
It's always fun to just spend a few minutes with you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, really thank you. I know how busy you are. I really appreciate it. And everybody here does. So anyway, and so you're safe, no problems, no crisis with the fire.
Well, no, the fires are missing us and everything's okay.
Okay, because people were concerned, so good. We're happy that you're doing well. So, Dr. Lisle, today we have a topic that people have been contacting me about, and actually I am interested in it too. And I have a few questions that people have emailed me, but please feel free to, talk about anything else you want. We just love to hear you. So one of the questions is the coronavirus pandemic affecting our mental health?
I think that you might be able to make that case for some people. I mean, mental health is kind of a funny concept. So I'm not sure, and I think we begin with a problem when it comes to defining mental health. So the mental health isn't the same thing to me as whether or not you are feeling good and happy. Okay, so that's not that. If you're depressed because your I don't know, your cat died, which is a depressing thing, that isn't affecting your mental health as I define it. So mental health is something that I'm trying to think about what I would even consider a mental health issue. I'm not even, so I'm struggling, as you can hear, Gustavo, with the question itself. So if the issue is that are people, significantly less happy as a result of the coronavirus basically intruding on their existence in a myriad of ways, the answer is absolutely yes. You could also argue, and probably somebody could do this. I don't know of any statistics on this, but I've heard that such stats exist. You could, for example, do a per capita, week by week, month by month comparison of suicides, around the globe and associated with lockdowns and so forth. At that point, you would have a case for, quote, mental health being impacted by this. So it probably wouldn't surprise me if it is. So, but for the average rank and file human that is just irritated and frustrated and feels constrained and your freedom being constrained and mildly threatened by the coronavirus, in other words, your existence is worse, I wouldn't call that your mental health. I would just call that your general situation in life you are worse off. Okay, so if you have a job and you've been making $25 an hour, and then they come along and they tell you, well, sorry, we're going to have to cut everybody to 22. That doesn't hurt your mental health It just makes your situation worse. Okay, so that's how I look at this, is that people are less happy. Their lives are on average have certainly been significantly negatively impacted. In some cases, very significantly. So, but mental health is I'm sniffing in there a moral high ground that someone is attempting to grasp and get a hold of in order to possibly get some power to push back against some of the draconian government decisions. And I understand that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And if I could make that argument and make it stick, and anybody would listen, I would do so. But between you and me and the lamppost, being locked down is not particularly troublesome to humans, quote, mental health. I worked for 10 years in a maximum security prison, and those individuals did not, quote, crack up, lose their mind, get suicidal, or anything else more than the average person in the street, which is maybe a little surprising to people. I can remember a psychologist that was new to the prison system. He's a very arrogant guy, and he was an old man. He was about 60, which is younger than I am now. But at the time, I was a lot younger than he was. And so he came in, and there was this seminar, and they asked, suicide was an extremely big issue in the prison system because, people would sue. They would say, oh, you guys didn't do your job. The health system didn't do their job. So there was constant discussion about suicide mitigation. And of course, I looked at this and I completely rolled my eyes. It was ludicrous, and I'll tell you why in a second. But this guy, I forget what his name was. I swear his name was Julian, and his last name started with an R. But we're really reaching back now for quite a while. But I remember this arrogance of this guy acting like he knew what was up when he didn't know much of anything about prison psychology, forensic psychology, or anything else. And it was asked, well, how many suicides do people think, took place last year in the prison system? Well, I basically knew. In a prison system in California with at that time maybe 150 to 170,000 prisoners, there would typically be about 20 suicides a year. So it was on the order of about 1 in 8,000 people would commit suicide every year, which is completely almost identical, and in fact a little bit less than the base rate for the general population of the United States. Okay, so there's no evidence at all that getting thrown in prison and incarcerated, even in solitary confinement, increases the likelihood anybody ever commits suicide. This guy, so they asked, and this guy said, 6,000. He had no idea. He was off by a massive margin, which shows you that this man had, was using his sort of intuition that a lot of people will use when they're thinking about things like this. So they don't have a good feel for the numbers, and so they don't, et cetera. So the same thing is true with, problems with police and how often things happen that are very negative, et cetera. It's like, no, they're extremely rare in most countries where things go sideways significantly for anybody around an interaction with police. Unbelievably rare, by the way. So the same kind of thing goes on here. So I will bet you that we will find that the base rate of suicide in the U.S. population or elsewhere is not dissimilar to where it always is. It's probably going to be somewhere on the order of 1 in 5 to 10,000 a year at a given population. So anyway, I would be interested if I were to be corrected and it turned out that there was a significant uptick that we could point to coronavirus lockdowns, and maybe there is, but whatever it is, it's going to be extremely subtle. Perhaps we moved from 1 in 8,000 to 1 in 7,000. In other words, that would be the kind of thing that we might look for. But for the average human being, All we're talking about is being irritated, depressed, anxious. That's what we're looking at.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I think that the person that turned in that question was, because I condensed it a little, but this person was talking about the anxiety and the fear, the stress. We're seeing things for the vaccine, against the vaccine, that we're seeing, horrible photos or pictures of hospitals where they post, this is how you're going to end up, and
Right.
families being divided, and you're losing some friends because of differences, and all of that creates a lot of
Yes.
anxiety. And so one of the person is saying here, how would anxiety not be a part of mental health? What is your definition of mental health?
Yeah, I guess that's where we get down to. So the let's, for example, let's suppose you're sitting out in the sun and it's 98 degrees and it's unpleasant. Are you being damaged? Well, there's at some point where you might be damaged. But and for example, if it's in the direct sun, you get sunburn. Yes, in other words, you can actually get some damage done. But you can sit outside in not directly in the sunlight and be in 98-degree heat and be feeling unpleasant, like it's an unpleasant situation, and you feel hot and you're sweating and you're not comfortable. You're not comfortable, but are you being damaged? And the answer is no. Okay, so is that there's some point that you could be being damaged? Maybe if the heat stays, if you're out there long enough, essentially the stress of putting up with that excess heat could be, in principle, somewhat immunosuppressive. For example, in other words, it degrades the just overall efficiency of the biology of the body. So that's probably true, by the way. So, but it's pretty minor. So we're not going to be expecting much damage to the biology of the organism, and we're going to expect it to recover extremely quickly as soon as that stressor is gone. So that's how I would look at that. And so, yeah, in terms of coronavirus and all the a great deal of the stress of coronavirus is social psychological. So it's people arguing with each other, people trying to force their agenda on other people, the stress that this causes relationships of various kinds. That stress, you are well adapted to that stress. In other words, your ancestors lived in Stone Age villages, and they were arguing all the time and had disagreements constantly. And so you were built to be putting up with essentially the crap of the modern corporate environment. The fact that you get to go home at night and don't put up with the crap from the corporate environment, and that you actually have your own existence independent of the corporate environment, and the fact that you are free to leave that corporate environment and take your look at the next corporate environment that might be worse or might be better. Those are freedoms you didn't have in the Stone Age. The Stone Age, you're going to sleep with those people, you wake up with them, they're there all day long in every decision that you have. So if you're in an acrimonious kind of a situation with one or more of those people, it's unpleasant. So it's unpleasant the same way when it's a little bit hot, it's unpleasant. Is it damaging? No, it's not damaging. It's just unpleasant. Okay, so that's how I look at this. So I don't want to pile on this question, but it's also the case to keep in mind that unpleasantness is not nothing. So unpleasantness, this is your life. You can grow up with a pair of unpleasant parents or an unpleasant parent. They're not going to damage you, but it's like, wow, I had to be there for 18 years, for God's sakes. That was a lot of my life went down the drain with some difficult parental situation, or a big brother that was just a complete ass and made my life miserable. It's like it didn't damage you. It didn't stop your ability to be fully happy and full range of emotional reactivity and appropriateness to dealing with situational stressors in the future. Okay, so but at the time it's miserable. Okay, just like a draconian boss at your work, it's not doing you any damage. it's just like, God, 10 years under that SOB until I got my pension. And then when I got my pension, I turned in my, my resignation the next day. I've had people do things just like that. Like they waited an extra month just to make sure there couldn't be an argument about the pension or whatever it was. And then they quit. Okay, I had a young lady that had about up to here with her administration recently. And I said, well, just from the standpoint of your financial situation and your safety, you should probably wait till the middle of September. Yeah, she turned in her resignation yesterday. gonna take her chances, okay?
Yeah.
So the question is, are we suffering behind the social psychological stresses of coronavirus? Absolutely, we are. And from many different angles. And it's actually a very expensive human tragedy. It's tragic when anybody dies, and it's tragic when anybody's very sick and they may not recover. But the rest of it's a tragedy. In other words, weeks and months, and the days and hours of people's lives are being impoverished and stressed behind all this kind of acrimonious tension. And yeah, it's an extremely expensive process in human nature, vastly worse than it ever needed to be from any standpoint of humans against nature as a problem. The problem is really not that great. The problem exists and it's significant, but the problem is being leveraged for people who are attempting to profit personally from this tragedy. And there are many people that are profiting greatly from this tragedy, and they have there's a lot of power that makes that possible. And as a result, those individuals are out for themselves. And I'm not going to name names, but all you have to do is have a little bit of an imagination. One thing in the United States that one can do is, if you really want to scratch your beard hard and think, find out whose stocks have gone up dramatically in the last 18 months. And that starts to point the finger at individuals who have a great deal to gain by making this crisis vastly worse than it would otherwise need to be.
Dr. Lisle, talking about that topic of making this a tragedy way worse than it needs to be, someone sent a question saying that in one of the first webinars that you and I did, I think it was like a month after this all started last year, you mentioned that you thought that if this was going to be over by September, October, and we talked about some numbers in Germany and things like that. So this person says, how has your opinion changed, if has changed between that time and now? Do you think that this will ever end?
Yeah, my opinion's changed a lot. There's a lot I didn't understand about this. So it turns out that this sort of wave function that goes on with epidemics is it's understood at the level of very high mathematics in a way that I didn't have any idea how this worked. And so when I saw a wave coming down, I assumed that was going to be the end of it. In other words, I thought that this thing had washed its way through the public in a way that it does, and that we were at the end of it. Now it turns out that isn't the case, and so we actually had our big wave in the United States. We had it last January, February. So now we're having another wave, and that wave is pretty dramatically muted relative to the big wave that took place. This all has to do with these are like equations that have about 8 variables in them. So if you remember your algebra from way back when you were a kid, you remember that a couple of variables, x and y, are described as a linear function. In other words, that you draw a line, y equals mx plus b. If you then add more variables, things get more complicated. It turns out that the wave function of epidemics has a whole host of variables that are involved. I don't know, there are like 6, 7, 8 variables involved. And so it's very complicated and elegant mathematics. And it makes predicting it difficult to do in the blind. In other words, when you're at a standstill at the bottom, nobody kind of knows what's going to happen. They can guess based on some of these variables, but they actually can't know. And then when a wave begins, as they collect data, they can start to see what the math must be that's actually underlying the situation, or what it could be that may be causing the function that you're observing. Okay, so all in all, there's some things that are obviously extremely important, which are how many people have been infected and how well do they carry defenses to future infection as a result of having been infected in one of these waves, or at some point in the cycle. And it turns out that a great many people, for example, I'm thinking U.S., but you could think anywhere, a great many people were infected by the end of the big wave that took place in January, February. And as a result, the new Delta wave is significantly muted from there. It's another big wave, though. And the reason why it's as big as it is because the virus is mutated in order to become more infectious. So that's a very common issue in viruses. If we put a stressor on the virus, like, for example, social distancing or some vaccination type process, then it's going to have to worm its way around those defenses. And I don't know that the virus, the vaccination had anything to do with the variation of Delta. I don't think it did. It may in the future, but I don't believe it did so far. I think that what we saw in Delta was just a common pattern of the virus finding ways to become more infectious. In other words, simplifying its process, or having people, the genes engineering so you sneeze a little bit more often, etc. Whatever it is, that it manipulates the transmission situation. It looks like Delta variant is probably pretty significantly less severe in terms of its lethality. It's difficult to determine that for sure, but it would appear to be probably solidly the case as far as we can tell. But now, of course, in this process, a great many more people will be infected, and as those great many people are infected, now they go into the column of people that are very well defended, and therefore very unlikely to contract the virus or pass the virus in the future. The notion that the vaccines may help mute the passage of the virus was speculative and hopeful. It doesn't look like it's very useful as far as that goes. In other words, people that are vaccinated are very commonly infected and are very commonly passing the virus on. This is not a very openly discussed fact, and you won't see it in you won't see this as front page headlines for very long, but it is in fact a known truth, and therefore all of the push that we have as a public health and safety issue for the vaccine, in other words, that it's going to help stop the spread and therefore help other people from getting infected and then save lives, that doesn't appear to really hold much water. That was hopeful, speculative, and some early evidence that might be true, but it's turning out that variations of the virus worm their way around this pretty quickly, and that the defenses that are garnered from the vaccination, or it's really a partial vaccination is what these are. They may help people survive a severe course. That appears to be the case, and so that's something to look at when every individual is trying to decide whether they should get a vaccination or not. Everybody has to weigh their own cost-benefit about how vulnerable they personally feel about the coronavirus. So it actually gets more specific, depending upon where you are in the world. It's how vulnerable do you feel about the Delta variant? Okay, so those are open and honest and legitimate questions for every individual to ask themselves. It's hard to ask those questions in an environment where there's unbelievable motivation from major parties to try to constrain open open and reasonable scientific discussion. It doesn't have to be a debate. Nobody needs to be angry about this or insistent. We need to all understand that we don't know. These are open questions for science right now on the cost benefit for the vaccine, for example, for a 30-year-old normal functioning human. Nobody can. We know that the benefit from them personally would be minuscule. The moral high ground to push it so hard was the notion that we could seal off the virus and essentially basically make the population unable to. We could drive the virus into extinction if we could get enough people defended so that they wouldn't pass it. There are vaccines that if you receive the vaccine, you cannot be infected with the virus and you cannot pass it on. So that becomes a very legitimate argument for public health strategy. In other words, I may not want to get the vaccine. I may want to take my chances. But if I do that, I make other people susceptible because then I could be a carrier, typhoid fever, things like that. The coronavirus does not have that argument. That is the argument that we hear routinely in the United States. We hear it 24/7 coming from various and sundry news sources and commentaries, etc. But this is the people that are making those comments are generally, I believe, nothing more than innocent, ignorant people. They are just, journalists of some kind or somebody that's hired to write a 15-word piece for the New Yorker magazine, and they are not cognizant of the facts. The facts are very clear that any virologist of any standing and any honesty will tell you that the coronavirus cannot be sealed. Okay, this is we at this moment in human history, human beings do not have the ability to vaccinate you against coronavirus in a way that the word is sterilization. It just occurs to me. Yeah, so you cannot be sterilized from coronavirus. The closest thing that you can do to be sterilized from coronavirus is to get coronavirus. Okay, just to give you a feel for the extraordinary difference between any vaccination and having had coronavirus. The evidence from Israel indicates that you are 27 times more likely to get coronavirus if you are vaccinated than if you had previously had coronavirus and you are unvaccinated. In other words, natural immunity is 27 times more effective than the vaccine. Okay, so that tells us that the vaccine is effectively, as a public health measure, is a toy. Okay, it's a cartoon vaccine. Now, that cartoons can be cool, and cartoons can actually sometimes be useful in the world, I suppose. And this particular vaccine could potentially save your life, you personally, but it's not going to stop the spread of coronavirus. That it will not do. And so, so there's been a great deal of stress on human society and human freedom behind a mistaken understanding that the coronavirus or that the vaccine can sterilize populations and therefore stop the coronavirus from spreading. This is a misunderstanding of epic proportions, and I think a great many well-meaning public servants have tried to have their societies go this direction, only to find out that they will fail and have unknowingly been handmaidens of some pretty extraordinary profiteering individuals and corporations that would just as soon everybody be confused about that. So this is unfortunate because in my line of work, a great many people will call me and talk to me because they're having a lot of stress within their families, because people are houses divided, and you can only imagine someone who has believed in this mistaken, what I could only call propaganda. In other words, propaganda meaning that the person who originally designed the argument knew full well that it was false. They may have passed it on to a writer or a commentator or a TV personality that is absolutely innocent and is in fact, it's better if you do. So the best way to lie is to pass it to somebody who is honest and decent and has is well-meaning, and hand it to them and explain to them that how this is, and have them misunderstand it. So in the United States, for example, a rather beloved commentator in the world, a lot of people don't like him, but over the years, over the many decades, many people do, and for good reason. A man has a lot of integrity and a lot of intelligence, a man named Geraldo Rivera. And so Geraldo is powerfully insistent that everybody should be vaccinated, and that this is a terrible thing and incredibly selfish and misguided and immoral for people to not be vaccinated. I don't believe that anybody is handing Geraldo Rivera a check to say this, and I don't believe that Geraldo Rivera is by any means intentionally trying to mislead anybody. I believe he's an incredibly sincere man. He was a prosecutor, in New York City, and he's a well-known. I don't know him well. For all I know, he could be a total sleazeball, and he could be lying right to the camera. But my intuition about Geraldo has been that he speaks what his mind and his heart tells him, and he tries to tell it straight. And he's dead wrong. He's horribly wrong. Okay, and I'm sure that very smart people that are hired by very powerful interest groups and trusted and intelligent people have carefully misinstructed Geraldo into not understanding the facts of biology here. And that leads Geraldo to be vehement and moralistic and very effective at convincing all kinds of people who legitimately and for good reason trust Geraldo. And Geraldo is just one example, but Geraldo is an example that I happened to see on the television sometime in the last 2 weeks. And when I heard him, I'm like, I wasn't angry at Geraldo. I rolled my eyes and thinking, oh my God, he totally doesn't understand. Okay, so this is the problem. So within families, a vaccinated individual that has bought this argument will tell their unvaccinated son-in-law, my God, you are dangerous to me. Don't come over for Thanksgiving. And the vaccinated individual has no understanding that if that son-in-law was vaccinated, it would not reduce their risk to you 1%. They're just as likely to be infected with coronavirus and just as likely to spread it to you. Okay, so this is an extraordinarily difficult thing to disillusion people of a story that has been orchestrated at the highest levels of world commerce and perpetrated by their handmaidens, probably almost all of them completely innocently. So we have a widespread misunderstanding about what is possible. We have a whole continent in Australia where I do not believe that the powers that be there are on the payola. I don't think that they are getting checks from Pfizer. I don't believe that. Yeah. I don't know, but they haven't been doing it their whole life. They haven't been locking people up and throwing away the key and basically imposing all kinds of brutal constraints on human freedom. They haven't been doing that for the last 20 years. Why start now? The answer is, if you are living in fear and have an enormous sense of responsibility, and you have been told and misinstructed about the truth, you will follow through and do incredibly dangerous things to people and not know that you're doing the wrong thing. This whole thing, Gustavo, reminds me of a chapter of mine that I wrote in The Pleasure Trap. And it's called Getting Along Without Going Along, I believe. And it's the story, and I tell the story of the Milgram study. So the Stanley Milgram study that was conducted in the early 1960s at Yale University is the most famous and, in my judgment, the most important experiment in the history of psychology. And it tells the story that average, well-meaning, totally decent human beings if you put them in the right set of circumstances, they will kill other people that they just met. And they will do so because they're told that it's the right thing to do and it's what they need to do. And they'll know full well that they're doing it and they feel terrible about it, but they are convinced that it's the right thing to do. This is what I see. I see a worldwide Milgram experiment. And I see many of our leaders doing their very best to try to do the right thing, but somebody is telling them the experiment must go on, the experiment must continue. And that is a chilling phrase. If you are a student of psychology, the experiment must continue. Those are the words that Stanley Milgram used to tell a subject that they needed to continue to shock a man in the next room who was screaming in agony and they knew had a heart condition and was saying he couldn't go on because the pain was too great. And when they would turn to the experimenter and ask and say, that guy's in terrible shape, I can't do this, all Stanley Milgram would say is, the experiment must continue. And those types of words were enough. You can imagine if it wasn't an experimenter that you just met 15 minutes ago, but instead is a person that you know, that you've met multiple times, that is in a $2,000 suit, but looks very casual, perfect hair, and has a MD and a PhD from a very storied university, and is the advisor to your country's health office, and they're intimidated by that individual because they're in fact fancier in terms of their pedigree, their educational pedigree and achievements than your health minister is. And they explain to the health minister that the experiment must go on, the experiment must continue. Meanwhile, people are screaming and rioting and swearing up and down they don't need this and that they don't want it and it doesn't make sense to them. The experiment must go on. Okay? That's what I see. And I'll tell you, from my tiny little corner of the world, as I sit here and look at the obvious evidence that the virus, the vaccine does not sterilize. As soon as that was confirmed, that was absolutely and unequivocally confirmed by the end of July. Okay. So we have been more than a month now where in the United States, the CDC and the FDA and the NIH and the President of the United States and everybody else, everybody knows that the vaccine doesn't even come close to sterilizing you if you're vaccinated. So they know immediately that there is absolutely no reason at all to have anything called the vaccine passport or any vaccine mandates, because this is no longer a public health phenomenon. This now becomes morally, it becomes an issue of your own personal choice for you. You are no longer making choices for others if you choose to be vaccinated or not. If you choose to not be vaccinated, you are not representing a greater danger to your fellow man. That is not happening, okay? So now it's simply a matter of your personal individual choice. Do you choose to get this vaccine based on your understanding of its value for you? Okay? The governments of the world should be attempting to educate people in an unbiased fashion as best they can about the known cost benefits. That's what the government's job is. And the government, the governments of the world legitimately should be making the vaccine free so that cost isn't a consideration for their citizenry. That makes complete sense to me. Okay, so much of what has happened makes sense to me, and much of what is now happening makes no sense at all. Okay, and that is the reaction of many of us more academical commentators at this point, where we look at this and we say, okay, we had uncertainty in the science up until a month ago, and now we have a great deal of certainty in the science in when it comes to the public health issue. So now that's off the table, and now what's left is how do we treat people, whether they're vaccinated or not, that have infections best? That's an ongoing investigation for medical science. And also, how valuable are the vaccines and for whom? In other words, every category of individuals has a different cost-benefit analysis. And so governments should be seeking that information and attempting to distill it so that they can communicate to their populations about how an individual, if you're 42 years old and a woman in good health, is this an important thing for you to do or not? Well, here are the numbers. This is what we would now understand at this moment in time. Those would be legitimate things for the government to do. That's what I thought they were for. That's what I thought the National Institutes of Health and the Center for Disease Control and the Food and Drug Administration, I thought that that's what these things were for. Right now, that's not what it looks like they are for. Looks like they have agendas that they are pushing and that people are afraid and confused. And this is causing a lot of strife within families and between friends. And a great deal of disruption is behind some very serious misunderstandings and a great deal of fear. And, I hope that at the end of this, some clarity is achieved, but I don't know, Gustavo, what's going to happen.
Right. No, it seems difficult that we will know what will happen.
Sure.
But what you were mentioning is really to go back to the beginning. You were mentioning all this. There is a lot of stress on people, whether they are on the side that they want to be vaccinated and want everybody around them, or the other side, and there's some frustration, stress, fear, and so any words of advice from you how to deal with it? I don't want to compare this to the when we switch to a plant-based diet and we have our friends, how are you going to do that? Why don't you try this? It in a way, but and you give a conference on how to, when you're saying, well, I'm just running an experiment, we'll see if it works or not. What can we do?
You know what? That's actually some of the tools that I developed from dealing with the stressors of the plant-based diet problems over the last 30 years. We can adapt some of those to this. And so within families, for example, between two friends that disagree on this, it's useful to have the notion of, hey, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the best move is. Let's take it from the standpoint, let's suppose you're vaccinated and your friend is not vaccinated, okay? I would encourage you to educate yourself, for example, and come to understand that your friend is no greater risk to you than a vaccinated individual. That's super useful. So we know that's true. So it appears actually that vaccinated people, because they are actually buffered a little bit to some degree from the infection, that they could be actually carrying more virus and therefore are more infectious than an unvaccinated individual would be if they get close to you. So they also might get closer to you because they have less symptoms and therefore are less aware that they could be infected. They could also easily believe that because they are vaccinated that they are relatively immune from infection, which is not true. So there is the CDC is very clever in their propaganda, saying, well, very few people wind up being infected, for example, if they've been vaccinated. Well, very few people that are unvaccinated are infected. So they refuse to actually make apples to apples comparisons. But when we actually see populations, for example, in Brookline, Massachusetts, where there's an outbreak as a result of a big shindig where people were hanging out together and having sausages on the sidewalk, and it turned out that 75% of the people that were infected and came down with infections turned out to have been vaccinated. Okay, doesn't surprise us. About 75% of the area was vaccinated. So essentially, the vaccinations were about dead even. In other words, you're about as likely to get if half of the population is vaccinated and half the population is unvaccinated, you're about 50% likely if you get the coronavirus, you're just as likely to get it from a vaccinated person as an unvaccinated person. If it happens to be in an area where there's a lot of people that are vaccinated, then you're more likely to get it from a vaccinated person than an unvaccinated person. So it's important for you to understand that, so if you're a vaccinated person looking at this problem, that your friends that are unvaccinated, they are worried about side effects. They are not irresponsible in any way. In other words, this is not an irresponsible position that they have. You are not you're not all in this together to stamp out the coronavirus. That is a propaganda fantasy that is utterly unscientific and impossible. Okay? So if you are a vaccinated person and you are struggling with people in your friends and family that are not vaccinated, understand that they are taking a risk that the vaccination could save them a nasty infection or death. And it's a risk that they are taking based on their fear of the side effects of vaccination. You could try to teach them that they are mistaken, but that's difficult since nobody in the world knows. So since that data doesn't exist, you can't convincingly make that case because the data doesn't exist anywhere. So there are people that thinks that data exists, but that data does not exist. So you might say, oh, but look at all the people in the hospitals that are dying that are unvaccinated versus unvaccinated. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have a long-term random assignment condition trial that actually indicates all-cause mortality showing a benefit from vaccinated people over unvaccinated people. That evidence does not exist. That is the evidence that is required by any scientist that is making the claim that the vaccine is saving lives. You don't have that evidence. It may be that at some point we get evidence like that, or we could get other correlational evidence that could be overwhelmingly convincing. I believe it probably does save lives in a subset of people. So I don't believe it's saving lives of people under 50. I think that's unlikely based on the evidence that I've looked at. I'm no authority on this stuff. This is biostatistics at the highest level. So Martin Kulldorff at Harvard University is a biostatistician at the very highest level, and he believes that the vaccine is useful for elderly, possibly immunocompromised individuals, that he believes that it's a winner. I hope he's right, and I believe he probably is. Okay. The rest of it, Martin Kulldorff rolls his eyes and says, I don't want to quote him, that basically under 50 doesn't look like it makes any sense. Now, so if you're a vaccinated person and you are attempting to sell the vaccine to a person who doesn't want it, that's a friend or family member, understand that a leading biostatistician in the world sees no reason to support that decision for anybody under 50. And after that, it's iffy. And then there are subsets that he would say it looks like it's a win. If you know that evidence really well, then sell it. If you don't know that evidence very well, maybe you better just hope that you did a good thing for yourself and that it was worth it, and that good chance maybe it was. Okay? But it's not for you to be pushing on anybody else. It's their problem. So that's how I would look at it if I were vaccinated. If I were unvaccinated and people were pushing me to take the vaccine, my response to them would be, listen, I'm looking at it. I have to try to analyze whether or not I think it's in my best interest. I'm not sure. There's a lot of different opinions out there, and those opinions are a lot of times diametrically opposed to each other. But there are very intelligent people on both sides of the question for me. And so I can't answer it now. I'm waiting for more data. Okay? So that's what I'm trying to do. So you could be right, and I could be missing a bet. And if they attack you, that it's your responsibility. Yeah, that this is the point where we stand on. Say, no, I understand that that's incorrect. And my understanding is that you're just as likely to pass the virus if you're vaccinated as if you're unvaccinated. So I'm not being a threat to anybody by leaving myself exposed. The person who will pay the price for this, if I'm mistaken, is me. Okay, so that's what I'm going to have to do until I see more convincing evidence. So you absolutely could be right. I could be missing a bet. I may live to regret this decision. Okay, that may be true, but right now I'm going to sit on the sidelines and wait until there's more of a consensus, because right now I don't see a consensus.
Right.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you for their concern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, there are a lot of comments going by too fast, but one of the people here says, all these comments reflect the confusion and side taking in society. Pretty sad state of affairs. Only time will tell who gets to say, I told you so.
Right.
I guess that's what you're saying.
I'm not interested in telling anybody I told you so. Okay, so I'm hoping, for example, that the vaccines turn out to be, in the final analysis, when the honest tally is added up, I hope that they were very effective and very useful. I hope that that's true. I hope that the 150 million Americans and other hundreds of millions of people around the world that have taken the vaccine, I hope that when we actually look at the entire accounting of the entire thing, that we look back at this and believe that it was worthwhile to do it. I'm completely don't know that at this date. The fact that we pushed vaccines on 60% of the United States population, where world leading experts in biostatistics said that makes no sense at all. Okay. And we didn't do that behind the argument that it was in those people's best interest. We did that behind a mealy-mouthed hybrid argument that served the interests of corporate sponsors. The idea that it was your personal responsibility. Okay, so that was the moral leverage here. The moral leverage was not, you should do this because you need to be protected. No, that wasn't what the leverage was. The leverage was, you need to do this in order to save your grandmother. And that turns out to be a false assumption. And that false assumption was uncovered unequivocally by the end of July. It was actually suspected considerably before then, but by the end of July, it was a known hard fact of science. That being the case, the leadership involved around the world, but particularly indicting the United States, because they are the world leaders in commentary on this, Dr. Fauci and company. These people had a moral responsibility to look in the camera and tell the truth very clearly about what the implications of these studies were. Okay, they did not do so. They're clearly all in on a mass vaccination mandate strategy, which makes no sense scientifically and is completely unethical, because we have vast quantities of people for whom the cost-benefit analysis is exceedingly unlikely to be in the positive. Okay, if you are a 25-year-old person and you are in very good health and athletic and you don't have any bizarre, extremely unusual threat to your life, the odds that if we vaccinate 1 million of you, that we will save somebody and that nobody else will be substantially harmed or hurt by this is insane. Cost-benefit analysis that you can monkey with a healthy human like this and make a profit on something like coronavirus is exceedingly unlikely to be true. Is it possible that if we throw them all in the pot from 0 to 100, that we have a net profit? Maybe. Okay. So I'm not willing to indict the entire enterprise. I am willing to indict the fact that there makes no sense to be pushing vaccination. We can offer it to people. If you're 42 years old and you say, you know what, I want the vaccine just in case, fine. I have no problem with that. I'm not anti. I don't think you should be banned from taking it. Okay. But if you're that 42-year-old and you look at your personal risk profile and you say, no, I don't feel like doing that, you should not be shamed or pressured or not allowed to enter a building or allowed to work in a capacity. I want people to imagine the following fiasco with respect to healthcare, because everybody immediately leaps to healthcare and says, oh yes, but healthcare workers should be vaccinated. Well, that's a terrible mistake, people. This is a deep misunderstanding of the basic scientific and biological logic here. I want you to think about two people that are nurses. We won't be sexist here. We're going to call one of them John and the other one Mary. Okay? So we got two nurses, and these two nurses work with, I don't know, elderly people in a nursing home. And so we're very worried about them passing the coronavirus to these people. So it turns out that we don't make people get vaccinated. So it turns out half of them get vaccinated and half of them don't. So John gets vaccinated, but Mary does not get vaccinated. Now, John gets the coronavirus, and he doesn't know that he has it. He has a little bit of symptomatology, but it's muted. And he thinks to himself, I'm fine. I'm pretty sure I'm fine. I can go to work. Mary gets the coronavirus. Because she's not vaccinated, she is substantially more symptomatic and therefore decides, you know what, I'm not going to work. I feel pretty bad. If we were to do a titer, or to actually analyze how much coronavirus those two people have in their nose, we would find out that John has just as much as Mary, except that Mary calls in sick. John doesn't. He feels pretty good. He doesn't want to miss the money. And he's pretty sure he's fine. And besides, he's been told he's vaccinated, so he's unlikely to have a virus. It's probably not coronavirus. It's just probably his allergies acting up. Oops. Okay. This is a tragedy. This is a mismanagement, misunderstanding on a very simplistic notion that if I'm vaccinated, I've been sterilized. No. Okay. That fantasy has been perpetrated by vaccine manufacturers and government health officials, and it is a pipe dream. It was never true. It was never likely to be true, and now has been proven false. So what really should happen in that nursing home is that everybody should be tested. If you're going to work there, you need to be tested consistently and often, whether you're vaccinated or not. And there should be no requirement that you be vaccinated, because vaccination in no way protects the people in that that are the patients in that nursing home at all. There's no protection whatsoever. Okay, so this is a if anything, you are at greater threat. So this is the deep misunderstanding, and it's astonishing that, I mean, it's not so astonishing because I understand that it's confusing. Because when we think vaccine, we think we're protected, we think we're sterilized, and therefore we're safe, and we've done the right thing, we saved everybody. No, that's not how it is. These aren't traditional vaccines. These are gene therapies. It's a different thing. Okay, they give you some resistance, they give you a leg up, they give you an ability to fight the virus, but they do not sterilize you from the virus. And so as a result, the entire moral argument behind the modern crisis that we have in terms of governmental management and general public management of this, it shouldn't look anything like it looks. And I'm reminded of that. It's an exciting moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's upside down because it's tragic. It's the moment where Harrison Ford and his buddy figure out the map of the ancient city, and then they look at what the Nazis are doing and they say they're digging in the wrong place. And they realize they've got it figured out and nobody else does. Well, this is the flip side of it. It's tragic. We are digging in the wrong place. We're trying to get everybody vaccinated to protect the world. No, we need to actually be working on therapeutic agents. We need to have vaccines for people for whom the cost benefit is one tool that they can use. We need to get people eating much healthier than they're eating to help defend themselves, which turns out to be no small issue at all, people. Turns out to be a very, very big issue with respect to how well you will withstand coronavirus. And so we need actually public health officials speaking about the things that are very important, and we need our great scientists directing their time and energy and national resources and international resources towards very effective treatments, of which there are some extremely promising things that are on the horizon, and I believe will be game changers. I don't know what will happen. I don't know whether or not the veil of mass ignorance and hypnotism and propaganda will be lifted, and suddenly we will have rational discussion and rational decision making. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that it's a heck of a mess.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lisle. This was very interesting. I didn't want to interrupt you because, it was very, very eye-opening, and we do have people that are not happy about that, and some who are. So
that's all good.
That's how it is. But to close this webinar, I would like to ask you to give us an update. Now switching to give us a little update about your upcoming book. Well, I don't know if it's upcoming, but it's your next book, because people also ask about that all the time.
Yes.
So what's going?
We are diligently working on this thing. It's a major project. People will understand why this is taking more time than we might have thought. We will release, for those of you in the Living Wisdom Library, we're actually going to release a little bit of it so that you can see what we're up to, and we'll probably be releasing little bits of it along. We're not going to release too much, because when you read it in whole, the gestalt of it is we wouldn't want to wreck it, but we will at least help people understand. But there is a real live book. I won't show you all the notes and the mess that's involved, but here is the manuscript. It's very large, and a lot of editing needs to be done, but it's the story of, it's actually the Pleasure Trap was sort of the story of human health. This book is the story of human happiness. So this is the other pillar of life on Earth for humans is basically in the same way that the Pleasure Trap is the story of the fundamentals of human health that we think are often overlooked. Diet, sleep, exercise, productive activity. These are, sunshine. These are in water fasting. These are super core pillars and fundamentals of health that are that when those things get out of balance, those are core problems, are core generators of the problems that people see. In the same way, there are fundamentals to happiness, and those fundamentals are when I work with people about things that they are struggling with, we are aiming at trying to analyze their struggles through the lens of the same types of fundamentals that involve in health. They look a little different. They center on self-esteem and self-confidence, that sort of thing. And there's much to that story. Anyway, that's the story that we're telling, and it's long and hopefully elegant and worth the wait.
All right, very good. Well, we'll look forward to getting our hands in that book. And in the meantime, it's true correctly that people can go to your website and they can schedule a session with Dr. Hawk or with yourself. Is that still available?
Absolutely. And Dr. Hawk and I also talk regularly to the Living Wisdom Library, the group of people that are joined our sort of in-house thing. And you can also listen to us on Beat Your Genes that are freely available. Mm-hmm.
How do people listen to Beat Your Genes?
Just look up Beat Your Genes on the web, and and I think you can. There's like over 250 episodes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, those are wonderful episodes. Really wonderful. Well, we'll do that. We've taken up your time. And
very good.
So much. Thank you. It's invaluable. Thank you.
Very good. Good luck. Good luck with all. Thanks for having me, Gustavo.
Okay, no, my pleasure. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.